Hello.
Welcome back to The Scoop. It is our 4th edition, and we are doing it on ABA and ACT training. Do you want to explain what that stands for, ACT?
Yeah, so ACT stands for Accepting and Commitment Therapy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how ACT can be applied to our field and into behavior analysis, and how it's related to what we call relational frame theory.
Do you want me to give a little bit of history?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay, so we did a little bit of research and kind of looked up just when it started, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised how long it's been around. It's been around since 1981. That's where it was first had started. And right now, well, as of 2020, when this paper, which will, this is, I'll go over kind of what this paper and this, talk about where this research comes from. Was for 2020, and there was 300 different published randomized controlled training trials of ACT. So I thought that was super interesting too, because honestly, I thought it was in the last 5 to 10 years. So that's actually shocking to me. Mm-hmm. So it's been around a long time. So that was kind of cool to find that out. You know a little bit about where it comes from, where it started. Do you want to, as far as the original person, do you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of
how sure. Yeah, and I disclaimer, I'm no expert on ACT. We are just talking about it in generalities and how it can apply to your regular life as well. So Steve Hayes was the founder of Accepting and Commitment Therapy. So him and his team did a lot of research development around this. It started with relational frame theory, and what relational frame theory is basically how our verbal behavior, like what we say, relates to different things in our environment. So I'll take an example actually, from the Tarbuck's paper that we're referencing here, is that you meet a friend, and this friend's name is Bob, okay? And you heard that Bob is very talented. He's a good artist. He's a very delightful person. And then you find out that Bob has a friend named Tom. And now you think that Tom, even without necessarily meeting him, is a delightful person and maybe a good artist. And then you find out that Tom has a friend named Paul, and you also think the same about Paul. And then you find out that Paul was stealing money or shoplifting, or you find out something like that about Paul. And so now it changes your perception of how you and your relations to the other people in the story, which are Bob and Tom. So that's kind of how, in a nutshell, there's a lot about relational frame theory, and I'm not using all of the proper terminology or anything like that. So just a brief description, just so you can kind of see how our language and how that relates to other things. So other examples are I see a dog, I call it a dog. I see a different breed of dog, and I learn that those different breeds of dogs are also called dogs. And then I see a puppy, and I realize that that's from the same, it's a dog, but a puppy is smaller. And so you kind of relate all these things together. Okay.
So is it kind of to me, in our ABA world of doing this forever, it's almost just you're generalizing, right?
Yeah, it can be overgeneralized when it comes to the relations that you have made to other things. Yeah, so I could meet a certain person that maybe looks a certain way, and I could give them a term.
Okay.
And then that term is overgeneralized to all people that have long hair or something like that.
Which we see. Mm-hmm. I mean, that definitely happens.
Yeah.
So
So,
that's interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So it starts with this like relational frame theory, how our language kind of makes these relations and make these conditioned like responses and discriminations and things like that. So it kind of starts in this realm. And what ACT is meant to do is to work on this psychological flexibility. And we're going to get into more of like the hexaflex and what this like psychological flexibility is. But the ACT piece of that is essentially looking at how we kind of break up these relations, how we quote unquote deal with some of those, so it doesn't like impact our life. Language is very, very powerful, and you also kind of need a way to kind of like work through that, and maybe not have so many overgeneralizations.
Okay, it's interesting. Yeah, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. How long ago did you go to the boot camp?
I went to the ACT boot camp. When was that? 5 years ago?
I was gonna guess 5.
I think 5 years ago. Yeah, it was in Fort Lauderdale. It was amazing. It was like 3 or 4 days, like from like morning to night, hearing a lot of different like instructors. All the people in the article that we're referencing were there. Steve Hayes was there. So all of these people that are much well versed on these topics and in the field in general. It was just really powerful. And I didn't just take away from that to apply it to my career. I also took that and applied it to my life.
I remember it was life-changing for you.
It was super life-changing.
Another clinician, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very powerful, very impactful. And it was something I never like stopped learning about or stopped like growing from. And I just kind of continued to like keep up the work, like do the work, do the research, apply it.
I thought that this article, like we're talking about, I thought it was very helpful. It was very friendly because it gave lots of examples of everything. So it made me kind of think about it in context of what we already do. For me, just being somebody that this was new to, and probably a lot of our clinicians, they don't understand, or it's just, I always thought it was, you took the feelings and you measured the feelings like that's, you do, but you don't, right? So like this article really clarified for me how you do that. And parent training was a big one that they really talked a lot about. I don't know if they do in the boot camp or if that's the whole thing, but that was a part that was very interesting to me, is the parent training part of how you don't go into these deep emotional feelings per se, at least that's what they recommend in the article, but because that's more of like the psychology part, but you do have to find out why they're doing what they're doing and kind of pull that out of them and then be able to measure, that's where the ABA part comes from, right? Making it observable and measurable, and how you do that. So I think that's going to be interesting as we go along in this podcast, is to kind of do the best that we can to describe that, because I think that's the confusion, at least from my standpoint and from what I've observed, is how do you measure feelings? Like, it's not right. That's it. I mean, could you explain that a little bit from your perspective?
So there's these like invert behaviors that we all have. I mean, even going back to Skinner, like the invert behaviors were important, just as important as the overt behaviors. And so how do you measure those? And really looking at, if I have an invert behavior that's going on, you're going to know about it when I start speaking and through language. And that's why we say language is so powerful, because through language, you are able to measure some of these like internal events that are happening.
I love it. Yeah. So that's kind of, I think that was so helpful as you get into all of this, is exactly, it's all the same, and how you measure it's, how like everything that you just said, as far as your language, your actions. And that's why I think parent training was really interesting, is how to be effective with parents. So that just sticks out in my head. But so what do you want to go to next? What would be a good segue?
I mean, if we want to jump into the hexaflex, we can do some of that. So I can try to show you a little bit of a visual. And so I'm taking from like this visual. I just thought it was a really good visual, a really good descriptions, layman's terms descriptions of like each part of the hexaflex. So when we talk about the hexaflex, we first discuss like the middle, which is that like psychological flexibility. So everything is kind of touching on this like flexibility. And what this means, I'm just going to kind of read it so I don't mess it up, is defined as being in contact with the present moment, being fully aware of emotions, sensations, and thoughts, welcoming them, including the undesired ones, and moving in a pattern of behavior in the service of chosen values. So that definition really kind of pulled together like each point of the hexaflex. But that's kind of what we're doing. So now
I think the hexaflex too, I posted on in the picture on here. So if you look at the picture that's posted to this podcast, I believe it has the flexibility and is that what it is?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's awesome.
So that's on there if you want to take a peek too.
Yeah. And this is once you kind of understand each point of the hexaflex, that's kind of how we integrated different pieces of this into our work, is really what happened from there. So when you talk about something like, we'll start with present moment. So present moment is the process of becoming acquainted with sensory experiences in that moment. Through this, clients are able to develop a platform of awareness that is a crucial foundation for the exercises and act. It feels nice to be grounded. So at times you'll see us practice present moment with our clients by having them identify things in their environment, usually through tacting, that they're tacting certain like emotions or senses, I should say, like the 5 senses. So thinking of it like that. So tell me like 5 things you smell, 3 things that you feel, 1 thing that you taste. So we kind of go through this to bring back to like what's happening right now in this very moment, rather than thinking about like other things. Or we have a lot of individuals who perseverate on certain pieces of their day or their life. And so you can do some of these present moment exercises to limit some of that like persistence or worry of different things. So I have, I've done a lot of like different trainings in this that teach things in like very different ways. But one exercise that was done with me was that like humans naturally never listen. So we're never listening. Okay. There's always something that is going on. Okay. And when we're not in the present moment, we are interpreting things, or we didn't get all of what you said. Okay. So if I told you a story that on Monday, I'm going to meet with my son's teachers to talk about his lying. I just don't understand like why he is lying and telling these huge elaborate stories that really aren't true. And right now it's not getting him in trouble, but it might one day. What were you thinking about when I was telling that story?
I was listening to somebody in the background.
Oh,
first of all, because I was like, oh, are they going to come up here? Are we going to be able to hear? Mm-hmm. So like, that's one thing. But I would say is he a liar? And you're seeing, is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. And that's what you heard. Did I say, is he a liar?
Like, is he a liar? Like that you're, and then I started relating to my kid. If you want me to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when he lies, so that I immediately started to go to the next thing, interpreting that with my experience.
Right. So you're now building those relations rather than being in the present moment and with me. Now, it's not right, wrong, or otherwise, right? It's just the fact that was kind of proven to me that we just don't listen. Like as humans, we just don't listen. Now, to become a better listener, there are things that you can do where you can paraphrase what the person was saying. They do a lot of like different grounding exercises. So like feeling your feet on the floor, like feeling that kind of like sensation. So going back to like some of your like sensory processing pieces. But either way, there's still something going on in the background that also might capture your attention. So keeping in mind that we don't listen also might help us be more present. Something that I struggle with is I'm a very analytic person, right? I mean, that's a lot of us are in this field. And so I'm overthinking, or I'm thinking about the next thing rather than being present and just doing. Like just doing the thing. Like I'm fully present here and I'm just going to send the email. I'm not thinking about what the person on the other side is going to think of me after sending the email. I'm not thinking about like rewriting my sentences in the email 100 times so that it sounds a certain way. I'm just in the act of doing, which we'll talk about committed actions a little bit later because that relates to that.
Interesting.
Yeah. We have a lot of them. I don't know if you want to keep going.
Well, I think it's fascinating because I think I can think of 10 different things that happened this week that I'm like, look at that. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, cool.
So in going through this, we also have experiential awareness, acceptance. So sometimes we just call it acceptance and we kind of leave out the like experiential kind of part of this. But the process is practicing non-judgmental awareness of internal and external events. Through this process, one recognizes that there are some things that are out of our control, and that if we let go of the struggle with this, we can make decisions about the part we do have control over, our actions. So it kind of goes along with what I was just saying, like just do the action. So acceptance of, and it can be as simple. So I have a little exercise that I was also taught with acceptance. So it's talking more about like what you can control versus like what you can't control. So I have a pen in my hand, and the only part of this that I can control is holding this pen, and maybe holding this pen tight, however you define tight for that person. However, I can't control that if I let go that the pen's going to fall, because we're talking about gravity, right? So the pen's falling because of gravity. Okay. So if I let go of the pen, I can't control that it's not going to fall on the floor. So I'm accepting of like, that's just gravity. Like I have no control like over what happens. And so it's kind of looking at like those pieces, what you have control over, what you don't have control over, and just being accepting of that, like noticing this is what it is. Right. It kind of links back to some of our like nonviolent communication too.
I was thinking that like when in staffing, when you were doing the exercise, right?
I was doing the exercise on self as context, and it also went back to,
because that's what this is all reminding me of too. I'm like, wow, is this like really all tying in? So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So we can go to self as context. That's my favorite one. Mostly because I struggle with it the most. So I've had to, adapt. But self as context is the process of contacting the observing self. So you're observing a part of you. You're able to witness thoughts, feelings, actions at any moment. This part of you allows you to be mindful, and in practicing contact with the observing self, it's possible to be free from tightly held beliefs about oneself. So I did do this exercise, yes. when you look back on your life at like a moment in time or an experience that you experience, so that like observable place of like this happened, what we do with that is we start to like when people say things like I don't trust people because my boyfriend cheated on me when I was in whatever grade. Okay. When we do things like that, we are basically like telling ourselves this story on like how to live. What happened was the person cheated on you. You can observe like the act of that, like what that looked like. But the rest of it is just a story that I made for myself. I made the story up about how I don't trust people because of that. I didn't have to choose to not trust people because of that event. That was just my story. But look how it impacted my life. Your whole life.
Right.
So if you can undo the story that you made about yourself based off of this observational piece, then you could be left with a blank slate to do as you please. Which is like
pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Which is like the last part of this, where it says like free from previously held beliefs about yourself.
I like that.
So it's the possibility of potentially being free.
It's probably the hardest one for everybody too, because I think you're the hardest on yourself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really, everybody's so hard on themselves, and that's where all the emotions come from of being insecure and all of those things. You know, even when we started the podcast, we're like, I'm nervous. You know, like get into all of this, and it's a story we're telling ourselves. We should be nervous because. Whatever.
This one time.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of it. So interesting. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, something like a breakthrough for me was realizing that all of my public speaking and like stage fright piece happened when I was about 5 years old, because we were playing, and I think I've told you the story, but we were playing around the world with math problems, and I got the math problem wrong, and I lost the game for like my peers. And so like that thing, I made a story all through my life.
So now I'm not good at this, or I can't do this, or this is what's going to happen, because it did happen at that moment. Now I've made it into the story of it's always good, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's just,
which is like what happens with everybody. I feel I can't do that because of this, which really that's not true.
Yeah.
So that's
So you create your own identity, however you want it to be. People don't do that for you.
Yeah. Look at that. And I remember when you came back, you were like, I have never been so emotional in my life, because they really went after everything in you, right? Yeah. So if you want to do this, people, you be ready.
And it brings up some of that with our whether we're doing it with children or adolescents, adults. It does bring up some of those like negative type behaviors. I guess I don't want to call them negative behaviors, because to me,
it's like a root. You meant like the roots grow, right? Because that's what's created your narrative, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And like, so Mark Dixon makes a lot of, he does a lot of act work as well. And so he makes a lot of these like curriculums that are fantastic, that are all scripted out on how you can teach different lessons that have to do with different pieces of the hexaflex. There's also like an assessment that you can do that kind of tells you which part of the hexaflex or parts that individual is struggling more with, so that you can focus your instruction on that hexaflex. But I always wondered why, the first lesson in his ACT book was I think it was angry or sad, one of those emotions. And you had to draw a picture of an animal that would represent like your anger or your sadness. And even something that seems simple in nature brought up some like pretty significant
from that exact thing.
Wow. Yeah. Brought up some things that people didn't want to talk about. I did these lessons with an adolescent group, and they didn't want to talk about them. They were very closed off to like the whole process. And so there's a whole nother thing to say when like what happens in that situation. And I think you just kind of like have to take a step back until something does click. What ended up clicking was going outside and writing our emotions like on a leaf and ripping the leaf up. So more like concrete kind of examples for them was a little bit easier than some of like the drawing or things like that, which those lessons are also in there too.
Okay.
But yeah, and that is more of that leaf example is more of like these like diffusion exercises that we do, which is another part of the hexaflex. So cognitive diffusion is defined as the process of learning to notice your thoughts rather than getting caught up in the content of your thoughts. So you're observing your thought, you're acknowledging that it's there, and then you're able to let go of that, which can lead to significant distress or unworkable behaviors start to weaken. So in those activities, you do similar things to that. So there's so many of them. But I mean, we've done things where we've like put our emotions in balloons, and we went on like the top balcony of like the clinic by the stairs, and we like let them go and we watched them fly away, or I watched them like fall to the ground. So different things like that can really like be these like concrete examples of letting go.
Releasing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. That's so cool. It's interesting too, because when I was reading through this and how it just made me think of something of the history and where this just came from, in psychology. So I can see where that's all tying in, with the history of that, and how, as I was reading through this too, how you again, coming back when we're in ABAs, how to measure that and how to be able to, like in parent training, pivot back to what you're trying to achieve. Because it does talk about how you can get into these deep, right? These deep things. So my question to you is, when you were doing your boot camp, was there a time that you pivoted and stopped, or that you saw that occur, or was it like all like just let's go for it and you went as far as you could?
I was very much in the present moment as much as I could be during that time. So I just went in. I leaned in. I had a lot of acceptance to like the process, the different procedures. I wasn't necessarily like thinking, I don't know. I mean, they started with a lot of foundational pieces of how it's so integrated into ABA. So I guess I also never questioned it because of that, because some people do, like they question like, well,
for sure. Yeah.
How do you do this in the field? Is this part of like my scope of practice, and things of that?
Well, and they talked about that in this paper too, is that it has to be in you have to be able to do it effectively. And if it's out of your scope of practice, that you should be referred out or referred to another clinician. It talks a lot about that. I think it has right here, scope of practice versus scope of competence too. So how to refer out, it goes over all of that. So I just thought that was interesting, because earlier in the paper, it just talks about how far to go, and that it isn't to sit down and have a psychotherapy session with the parent, for example. I'm perseverating on the parent training, but that's just a big area that I love. And that's not the purpose of it, but to find the surface of this. Why is this person feeling this way? Why are they not? I think the example that they give is extinction. We know a lot of parents, will say to us, I feel really bad when he's crying, or how long am I going to have to do this? And so that's the example that they gave in the paper is, why do you feel that way? Let's talk about this. Well, I think I'm a bad parent because I'm the one that's supposed to be hugging them and telling them that's okay. And now I'm working, and I'm following through and not acknowledging, that they're crying because of this, behavior. So it talks a lot about that I thought was very interesting, because that's a common one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel my own guilt when I'm, with my kids and that kind of stuff. We talked about that. So I found that to be a little bit interesting of how you work through that with a parent, and you touch the surface. So found out that, it's been hard their whole life with their child, of crying and this and that, and that they're angry at their partner, I think is what it had talked about, because then the child goes to the partner, and the partner coddles them and tells them it's okay. And so now I'm the bad guy, or the parent's the bad guy. Or that's the story they're telling themselves, right?
Yes, exactly.
So it's just super interesting, because you got to the core of what's really going on very quickly, actually. And then it goes through what you can do to work through that, using, everything that we're talking about. So that's also in there that I thought was super interesting. The other thing that I thought was interesting too is how to even use ACT in administrative tasks. They also talk about that. So timesheets was one that they talked about, which I thought was fascinating too, because I'm like, okay, how are you going to do this? And so a lot of things that I think about that you've done with everybody is, what is, I think they talk about, what's the verbiage? So value-based. Is that one of the things on there?
Yeah, values and committed actions are the last two.
So if you want to talk about that, I can tell you the example that they gave for timesheets that I thought was, like, I don't value doing timesheets because I can't stand doing it. Like, that's what a lot of people will say. Like, it's tedious, but do you want to talk a little bit about that? I can give the example.
Yeah, sure. So the values process is defining what's most important to that individual in their life. And through this process of connecting to deeper sense of what matters, it's possible to define purpose, direction, and decision-making for a richer and more vibrant future. Values also refer to recognizing qualities of behavior one would like to live in line with.
Yeah, so do you want me to give you an example of that? Because I thought this was interesting. I wouldn't have thought about it this way. So what was asked was, what's meaningful and purposeful of why you do what you do, is what the question was. And so the response of the person was, helping the kids, helping them achieve their greatest potential. This is the example. And so they're like, oh, great. Okay. So I don't really care about the timesheets, and okay, but we can talk about how that's all related and how actually that is a value, based off of if in order for us to have that client achieve their greatest potential, we need to get the funding. How do you get the funding? You get and here's the relationship, right? Here's that, what we were all talking about in the beginning of how it's kind of all paired together, and that RFT. Is you got to do your timesheet. So it's all connected. That I thought that was fascinating, because of course I didn't think about it in that, perspective. So I thought that was great too, is getting back to your values, because how much do we talk about that with? I think that's all we talk about is the solid brick values.
We do touch on values quite a bit. Yeah.
So it's so interconnected. It's awesome. Yeah. So that was the example that they gave, is how to get to that boring stuff that's monotonous and I don't want to do it and whatever. Well, we can't provide those services unless we do this. So it starts here to get to here, which is getting paid, which then that continues, for you to come back, which gets you to your value, which is helping children achieve their greatest potential, which is why we should all be here, really, right? It should be the kids. It should be one of the big reasons, I would hope.
Should be, yeah.
Should be. Okay. So
there's no should or shouldn't. So.
That's right. Okay. So anyway, I thought that was a great example, because we deal with that every day too, is the converting of timesheets, which is basically just turning your timesheet in. So
it's very interesting.
Isn't it?
It does relate.
It really makes me think.
I mean, it does relate to a lot. It's kind of just life. Like this is, it applies to everything really. And it is about how do we make these things like concrete, observable, and measurable. Like how do we kind of like get there? And for our families, because we do utilize the matrix within the family, like development or goal development with the family. And it all goes back to all of these pieces of the hexaplex like I'm talking about. So you are looking at, so you have a family who is expressing guilt is really what's kind of happening.
Okay.
And parents have guilt about many different things. And so you are kind of finding out, well, what causes the guilt? What behaviors do you engage in when you are feeling this or expressing this or doing this? Like, what does that look like? So we talk about like, usually they're like negative behaviors. Like I feel guilt, so I do everything for them, and now they're not independent, or just for an example purpose.
Okay.
And then from there, you are looking at, well, like what do you value then? So you're feeling guilt, but like what do you want out of life and for your kids? And so they list some values for us. Sometimes we give like some prompts of like what values are, because there are some values, like a value isn't like values aren't like things. Like I'll have clients tell me like, oh, well, I really value my video game. So that's not
right.
I can't do much with that. So we kind of talk about like, well, what is it about your video games? And so do you value like fun? I mean, that could be something. And from there, we look at what actions or what behaviors that, again, are observable and measurable, so our committed actions, on what we're going to do to live more closely or align with our values. And we create the parent goals from that piece, as well as for the clients. It really stems from the committed actions. But before you can make the committed actions or the goals, you kind of need to know everything else.
Okay.
And some of the parents teaching like the acceptance piece of some of this is really helpful. And you might have to start there. I've had a couple of parents where it's more so about like, are we able to accept this? Can I engage in, once again, activities that are observable and measurable, that's really working on my acceptance of that.
Okay. That's fascinating.
It is. It's cool.
Well, and we've talked about even not knowing any of this per se, just that is acceptance of what can you do and what don't you want to do, because if we can't identify that piece of it, that's not going to work either.
Yeah.
Right? Because I want to do it. Has nothing to do with it if you don't want to do it. If you're the parent and I'm talking to you about this, it's so important to not put our values on them if the whole point is parent training. It's not going to happen. So I thought that was great when you guys had demonstrated that one staffing as well, was what's your values, what's their values, and how they vary quite a bit. And what I might think potty training maybe is one that I want, or maybe not. And they're like, I just want them to sit at the table because that's very important to us, to have dinner together every night for 5 minutes. That's all I want. And you're like, really? Like I've had parents not care about potty training. And I'm like, well, you have your child most of the time. If we're only working on that and there's not a value in that, then, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's super interesting and very valuable, and to talk about. So it's really exciting. I love it. So did we cover everything in there?
Yeah, because we just got through committed actions.
Awesome. I hope that this was helpful. I think it was really helpful for me to really dive deep and kind of look into the research and read through it. So I think that was fabulous. I want to continue. I hope that we can have everybody look at this and really reference this, because I think it is very valuable in our scope of practice. I don't think it's talked about enough, to be honest with you. So do you have anything else that you wanted to say about this or cover anything?
I guess I'll just leave it with like, do the research, do the learning, and see where that leaves you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we hope that this was very helpful. And if you have anything else that you'd like to hear about or have any us to comment anything, just let us know. And thanks for joining us. Have a great day. Bye. Good work.